Welcome back to Mompreneurs, the real deal, where we get raw and we get real. And we are getting raw and real with Sarah Breen, Dr. Sarah Breen, giving us all the goods, spilling about imposter syndrome, identity shifts, how do we shift things. And you asked me a question, and I've got a burning question for you. What is the biggest, maybe the biggest surprise in business as an entrepreneur that you faced that you didn't expect when you shifted? And also, what's the biggest struggle that you've come into being with?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to answer struggle first while I think about the biggest surprise. Struggle is easy for me because I do work with my spouse. And so that is the biggest struggle, because never did I think that was ever a possibility. I mean, I went into medicine and he was a journalist. So I would never even consider that we would work together. And it's funny because I used to say things like, oh my gosh, I would never work with you. So never say never, friends. Yes, and here we are. And so we are literally running a company together. And so finding that balance, again, with our communication skills being different, with our personalities being really different, and just figuring each other out in a whole different way, that has been a huge struggle. And maybe also a huge surprise as well. Maybe, coming the first year, we got through the first year of owning the business together. And I think that we're starting to figure out that balance and flow of, what works, what doesn't, how I like to be spoken to, how he likes to be spoken to, and our boundaries. Mm-hmm. Because boundaries are really hard, as you mentioned before, in general for moms and entrepreneurs, and then you throw in it's everything happens at home, and so boundaries can be really tough.
And I have another question follow up that, Sarah,
Yeah.
and that's, you work with your spouse. When you have an issue in business, you don't like something that he said, or he doesn't like something that you said, or you knock heads in business, how do you keep it from spilling into personal?
Yeah, it's easier said than done, obviously, but I would say in general for us, it's not really been an issue because, as you kind of alluded to earlier, I do tend to, I don't know if have a more masculine, what would you say, presence. I'm able to get my feelings out. Mm-hmm. I don't hold them in. I address what's going on at the time it's going on so that it doesn't build up and spill over either way, because it's not fair. And that's something that I knew that I was always going to have to do it would explode. I mean, there's just no reason to explode your marriage or your business over the other.
And so what advice do you have for moms that are struggling to use their voice in that way? Because it is a real challenge. And maybe it's in the personal life, and maybe it's with a business partner or with someone on your team, but what sage words of advice?
Yeah.
From my friend here who claims to have imposter syndrome, but she's a complete rock star. What would you say to the women out there that kind of have a hard time utilizing their voice?
There's a couple things. I think number one is, I'm a big proponent of therapy. So couples therapy is really important, because I think when either party is afraid to say how they really feel, then the relationship really suffers. So I think couples therapy is important, and I actually started it before when I said I will go into business with you if we start couples therapy first, because I want I already know our communication is going to be a problem, so why would we get behind that? So I think couples therapy, and I also think there's something to writing it down. So I think sometimes when you're in the heat of the moment, things get said that, obviously can trigger each other. But if there's something that you want to say that you feel you're not getting your point across, or that maybe the other person won't let you, send them an email, write them a real letter. It's at least it gets it out, and it gets it out in the open so that maybe you can discuss it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of power in that. It's really funny that you say write them a letter, because that's kind of how I had to process a lot of things, because I'm blunt, I'm direct. And people don't take that very well. So I know my method of communication comes across as very direct. Mm-hmm. There's no fluff. So if I'm dealing with somebody who needs fluff, I choose that in business, to write it in an email or write it in a text, as opposed to picking up the phone and just giving it to them direct and having them feel less than or whatnot, because it's not a reflection. It's just I'm just very direct. And so I think that that's really powerful to use in both ways. And what's your biggest success? What would you say is your biggest achievement, success, now that you're an entrepreneur?
Oh, there's so many. I love this life. I am so happy. I think my biggest success is how happy I am, and that spills over into my kids. So like I said at the beginning of this, my kids are number one to me, and they always will be. And so the ability to plan my schedule around them is the best. So, I mean, I have an assistant, and she schedules everything around my kids' activities, and being able to walk them to school in the morning, being able to pick them up every afternoon. Those are things I remember my mom being around for, and I was devastated that I couldn't do that in medicine. I mean, I missed a lot. And so I think being there now through the middle school years, being able to travel with them, being able to share with them what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and also to be an impactful entrepreneur. You know this, but our 10-year-old, I was told not to say my anymore. Our 10-year-old, he really, really enjoys philanthropy and giving back. And so he runs that part of our network. Empowering him at 10 to stand up in front of a group of entrepreneurs and tell them why he feels that packing backpacks for children is important. I didn't get that upbringing, and I just think it's so cool. So I feel more successful as a parent being an entrepreneur than as a doctor, which is funny. Never said that out loud before.
Well, it's really funny. So our crowning achievement is really the impact that we're having on our kids, and how our kids are turning into like amazing human beings. And, as moms, what is our number one responsibility? Is to set our kids up for independent human being success.
Right.
In a nutshell, and not let them die, of course.
Keep them alive.
We want to keep them alive, and we want to make sure that they become independent humans, when they reach adulthood. And so you're doing that in spades, and I think that transition speaks very loudly. I'm going to ask you, maybe it's a vulnerable question, and that's, what do you think is your biggest gap now that you've made this shift, and what might you do to come out of it? Because I think that would be very powerful for everyone watching.
My biggest gap, I would say, is definitely still, part of it is saying yes to everything. I did say that this was my yes year, and I was going to try all these new things, but that gets old kind of quickly. And so I think narrowing it down, honing in a little bit more on, exactly big picture. I'm not a futurist, so I'm not, you go into businesses and knowing the exit, and that's how you think. And so working more toward that is a gap that both my husband and I have, because we live in the now, which something to be said about that as well. However, it's not necessarily great at, with planning and especially owning your own business. So I think, working on planning for the future and looking at, everything that's planning for the company or the business that we want to have and not the one we do.
I think that's super fantastic. And so I'm going to ask the follow-up question. How are you going to go about sealing those gaps? Because that's something that a lot of people are afraid to say out loud. You just said it. So what are some things that you're going to do in order to close those gaps?
Well, I think looking at, sitting down and maybe actually taking time, scheduling time, even just with my husband and I, to say okay, what is our 1 year, our 5 year, our 10 year, what does that look like? Because truly it can be different for both of us. And I think we need to evaluate being on the same page. And I think it's fluid, it changes and life happens, but I think looking at the big picture together will make a big difference. It's something that we definitely struggle with and have used other groups to support us, to push us, make us do that. And, I think even potentially hiring a coach might be a good idea.
Well, I can help you with that if you like. Maybe not me, but I can put you in the right direction.
Perfect.
So all good things come to an end, including the show, and we're getting towards the end, Sarah. And I want to ask, Is there anything else that you really feel compelled to share at this point in time?
Wow. Well, we did get real and raw. Definitely more than expected, which is good. I think, that there's a lot of challenges in being an entrepreneur and being a mom. And I think that just knowing that you have the support of other women doing the same thing is so, so important. And you and I have talked on the show and off the show about it as well, is that there's just not a ton of us everywhere. And so making sure you have those network of women that understand you and can support you, because little things can just blow up if you don't have someone to talk to.
That's absolutely right, and I couldn't agree more. Thank you for sharing. This was super fun. I'm going to let you close us out today because we are at the end.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for allowing us to share our stories with you as we get real on Mompreneurs. Unfortunately, we do have to close, but we can't wait to see you same time, same station next week. Thanks so much.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All rights reserved.